Hi, everybody. My name is Marla Neufeld. I'm the founder of Green Spoon Martyrs third-party assisted reproductive technology practice group. On the surrogacy space, we talk about so many different topics related to third-party reproduction, surrogacy, egg, sperm. And today we are talking about the very cool topic of embryo donation. And with us today, we have Deb Roberts, CEO and founder of Embryo Connections. And it's always such a pleasure to work with Deb. And thank you so much for joining the show today.
I'm so happy to be here, Marla. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. And what you do is, I think, just so unique and such an incredible resource for people wanting to either donate or receive donated embryos. And would just love to start off with what made you decide to start Embryo Connections?
Yeah, I started Embryo Connections because of my own journey, which is, I think, where a lot of people start into the fertility world. So I was a single woman who wanted to be a mom, and I found that so first of all, I went through a very long fertility journey, and it was painful, and that I thought that it was going to be easy, that I would just be able to use my own eggs and inseminate and have a child, and that would be the end of it. And 4 years later, I still didn't have a child, and I had spent a lot of money and a lot of emotional resources. I think, more than money, it was the emotional resources. And I got to the point where I needed third-party reproduction, and embryo donation was really what I could afford. And I found that it was limiting to me, that I wasn't able to find embryos because I was a Jewish single woman, and a lot of the programs were faith-based. And that I wanted to have siblings, and that wasn't possible with clinics, and many clinics didn't have an embryo donation program. So there were just all of these walls that came up. And so I found my own embryos through Facebook. I went out with my own network and found my own embryos, which was pretty daunting because I hadn't told anybody that I was pursuing fertility.
Add that on top of everything else.
Yes, right, exactly. So I was exposing this, what felt like a weakness or a failure. And it was amazing the amount of support that I got from people who said, I am in my fertility journey, and I'll give you my embryos when I'm done, or I have these embryos. There were people that I didn't know that because my friends had forwarded the message on to other people as I'd asked them to do. And I got all of these people telling me, I want to donate my embryos and I don't know how. And then I knew about all of these intended parents who go through their fertility journey unsuccessfully, that they end without the desired outcome of children. And I also had been working with my own clinic to know how difficult it is for a clinic to execute an embryo donation program. It's just very, it's not only resource intensive, but there are also hurdles from a regulatory and relationship and counseling and legal standpoint that is, just makes it too difficult for them to run their own program, which is why there wasn't really a lot in the world of embryo donation outside of the faith-based programs.
Right.
So it was just an opportunity that I felt like I needed to help other families because I have two children of my own through this.
I mean, how amazing you created this like untapped, like there wasn't really, I wasn't even aware of other resources like what you do from your own needs. So, I mean, I think it's just so important, because the alternative is someone might have to either give up or find a donor egg, find a donor sperm. There's additional, hurdles to that, and expense and everything else. So, and there's people that have embryos that, would love to allow to help someone else. So I think it's really incredible. And how long have you been doing this for with Embryo Connections?
For about 6 years.
Okay,
and
awesome.
we've been growing every year. It's really amazing. You're absolutely right, Marla, that you didn't know about it. Most people don't know about it. They don't know that it's an option for their remaining embryos. They don't know how possible it is to have a child when you're going through the fertility journey, to use embryo donation as an option.
Yeah. And I guess that leads to my next question is, who can participate in the program? Like, I know you went through this as a single woman. There's challenges for every different type of person going through this, but who can participate with Embryo Connections?
Right. That's a great question. Embryo Connections is all inclusive. So we really want everyone who wants to be a parent to be able to be a parent. So we have a few limitations because there are guidelines that we've gotten from the mental health professionals in the Association for the American Society for Reproductive Medicine,
Right.
as well as physicians. So our guidelines are that they have to be 52 years or younger in age, or the combined
Okay.
age of 104.
Okay.
Because our program, we believe in choice, that both donors and intended parents have choice. We want people to match based on what their own criteria are. So we don't want to apply our own, whatever our own values are to that. But there are a couple things that we do. So in addition to that age limitation, we also do a criminal background check. It's not a home study. It's just an online background check.
And
And
that's
then
on the intended parents or
that's
the,
for the intended parents, right?
okay.
Because it's that way of saying to a donor that they can at least, there's
Relax.
that ante, yeah, they can relax to know that there isn't a criminal background. And then finally, they have to be evaluated by a reproductive endocrinologist that they can carry a pregnancy via a uterine evaluation, or they're planning on using a gestational carrier. And the
Right.
reason for that is simply because we want embryos that we want them to be able to transfer the embryos they get. So it's about just getting ahead of that question. Can I use the embryos once I get them?
Right. No, for sure. And leading into what is important for an intended parent to know who's looking for a donated embryo when they come to work with you.
Right. What they're looking for, honestly, intended parents want to be parents, right? And they've usually explored a lot of options. So they've maybe tried on their own, maybe they've tried using donor sperm if they're single. Maybe they've looked into traditional adoption. They've
True.
explored a lot of solutions. And so for them, the genetic component goes away. And what's left is, what is really important to me? Number one is that they have a child that is healthy and will be able to thrive and be happy, right? And so that's typically what they're looking for, is enough good quality embryos that they can at least have the one child they want, and maybe they want siblings. A lot of our parents are looking, our intended parents are looking to have multiple children. So the ability to have good quality embryos that will give them multiple children without significant health conditions, I think is
Right.
generally the statement. And then they always have their nice to haves, right? Which are, maybe they want them to look like them or have the same proclivities in life, right? They have the same
Right.
interests. And that's usually a high second criteria, but it's definitely there.
And then on the converse side, what is it you're looking for in an embryo donor when you accept somebody into the program?
Right. For an embryo donor, we do also have criteria. Most people would qualify, most who have embryos in storage would qualify. Particularly, and I want to specify that there are clinics that will not allow certain donors. We do, because our criteria is simply that they have at least 2 viable day 5 full blasts. So
Okay.
that's a lot for any patient to know about their embryo, so they can always come to us as long as they know that they have 2.
They don't have to be tested though, PGT or PGS
No,
tested. Okay.
no, that's not required, because I mean, honestly, some of the best embryos use donor egg, and we're okay with people who use donor egg, and those
Right.
embryos should not be tested. There's no
Right.
reason to test those embryos. So we just really want to make sure that our intended parents can have confidence that they're going to have a viable pregnancy and a healthy child, right? And so the limitations are really just the 2 viable embryos,
Okay.
and that they're emotionally ready to donate their embryos.
And like let's just say they have 2, those 2 necessarily would need to be committed to an intended parent. Like they can't keep one, or is it, how does
Yeah,
that work?
that's a great question, Marla. We want them, when I say emotionally ready to donate their embryos, part of that is that their family is complete. We don't want families to come in saying, I'm going to keep several embryos for myself, because that means they're not done with their family. And we don't want them to have any regret about
Yeah,
donating their embryos, because we know not every embryo results in a live birth and lots of things can happen. So we
absolutely.
really want them to be complete, their family be complete before they donate.
Right. That's very important. So then you have your intended parents, you have your donors. How does the matching process work? What makes a good match?
Right. So we do assisted matching, and it's what we call mutual matching, in that both the intended parents and the donors provide criteria. And their criteria is really what's important to them, right? So for an intended parent, as I mentioned, it's probably going to be about the quality of the embryos, maybe physical characteristics, and a couple of other things. The donors tend to be more focused on interaction, what kind of interaction they might be able to have with their intended parent, values, proximity or lack thereof. So they're going to be looking at slightly different things. So what we're looking for is just that mutual match, that
Yeah.
they feel aligned. We also look for a little bit of that alignment in personality or values, because ideally those families are connected in some way through life. It doesn't mean that they need to have a really close relationship, but the ability to be able to connect with one another for the sake of the children is important. And so, whether that interaction is very low or very high, to feel comfortable with that, and to feel comfortable that a donor can feel good about who they donated their embryos to, and vice versa, makes it easier. So
Yeah.
we rely on that. So we want intended parents to be able to have as many children as they want to have, so that children need to have more embryos. And then also that interaction preference, and then those mutual criteria.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, like you said, it's important that everyone's aligned. It doesn't work well if people are compromising in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable. And what I really love when I work with Embryo Connections is when it gets to my point of the legal agreement, once there's full medical and psychological approval, all of the things you just spoke about are in your match sheet. So, like, what do the parties foresee for their future communication? What kind of contact do they anticipate? What degree of openness is there? So you really take out a lot of the legwork for the lawyers drafting these agreements, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when it comes to interaction, we find that there's been a big shift, which is really nice. I'd like to see this shift in just among those who are in this family building space, to say, I know that my children probably need a line of communication with their genetic relations, whether that be on the donor side or on the recipient side. I think our donors are very comfortable with that idea, and so they generally want some line of communication.
Okay.
And we have a spectrum from high engagement to donor ID disclosure at 18. Most of our donors are falling in that space of semi-open to low engagement open to high engagement open. The idea that the children should be able to know one another, and the offspring should be able to get to have access to their health information and to knowing where they come from, just to understand their own, just who they are as an individual, and
Right.
maybe how much of who they are is genetic versus how they were raised, right? And so I think donors know that because they have children, and their children are curious, and they understand that these children might be curious. Intended parents understand that as well, but they're maybe a little bit more reluctant to go all the way to that high engagement open, because they're anxious, but they do recognize that they want their children to be able to at least drive when they know their genetic connections. And then I think it's valuable to be thinking about what's really important for the child, and how that relationship might change over time, so that intended parents could appreciate that donors really don't desire to co-parent, right? That fear of co-parenting or helicopter parenting is not founded in reality of embryo donation.
Right. And it's so hard for parents, intended parents, making these big decisions for a child that's not even born yet. So to foreclose any opportunity to have future communication, I mean, I'm glad to hear that there's a trend towards keeping things open to some degree so that they're not foreclosed from having the opportunity in case someone is curious down the road to learn more information.
Yes. Yes. And as a recipient, I can totally appreciate that intended parents really just want to have a baby, right? The goal is to have a baby and to have your own family. And
Right.
it's scary to think that there's somebody out there who might want to intrude on your family, and that's not the intent of a donor.
Right.
Um, so it's hard to imagine until you have a 5-year-old that
Right.
5-year-old might be curious, or that 10-year-old might be curious.
Right. Yeah. And you never know when
Yeah.
you get those questions and what they'll be. And so you have to kind of
Right.
keep things open. What are
Yes.
ways that the parents and the donors communicate? Like I know you mentioned these ranges. Is it through embryo connections, like a portal, or what are the ways that people typically can keep communication
Right.
open?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can start with the very highest. Some people come to us with their own family or friends and say, we want to donate our embryos to this person that we know, right? And then that relationship really starts at a really great foundation, and it's valuable to have a counselor help them understand how they're going to navigate, how they're going to communicate with one another long term. But the idea is that it should be very transparent and open. Then we have this range that goes from high engagement open to donor ID disclosure. High engagement open means that the children know each other from a very young age. So I think of it as akin to cousins in that parents don't ask children whether or not they want to know their cousins. They
Just
simply
do.
know them, right? They
Yeah.
just do. And there's never this moment where you meet them. Now they could be long distance or close, in proximity, and you see them all the time or you don't see them very often, but you always know you're related to them and your parents are helping you forge that relationship. That's high engagement open. And like I said, that doesn't mean communicating all the time, very frequently, but it just means that they know each other. Then there's low engagement open, which is where the adults are communicating. They're sharing updates, maybe pictures, sharing that with their offspring. So their offspring are aware, and waiting for the child to lead that desire to know one another, right? And so
Okay.
that's on both sides, that those children are saying, yeah, we want to know one another. And then the adults facilitate it at that time, which might be at 6 or 8 or 18, right? But the idea is, when the children are ready, the parents are ready as well because they've known one another for a long time.
Okay.
Then there's semi-open, which is communication through a portal. This is similar in that you can share updates or you can just share health information. You have access to one another through this anonymous portal, where they have the ability to share pictures, but they're not sharing last names or email addresses, so they can't be Facebook friends. They can't schedule a play
Right.
date until they decide that they want to, and then that can be opened at that time.
Okay.
And then that donor ID disclosure at 18, where offspring have the ability to reach out to us or to attorneys to get contact information for the donor. We don't actively facilitate any of those. Of course, if somebody comes to us and needs help with their relationship, we support that. But we rely on an outside provider for the portal.
Communication. And then what do you typically see as far as the disposition preferences from the donors? Because I know someone typically that might be going through the process of donating embryos might not want them destroyed necessarily, should the intended parent be complete with their family. So how do you see that typically handled, or a range of how that's handled?
Right, that's a great question. And so when we talk about matching, that's one of the things that we match on is disposition preference. Donors who come to us for donation generally do it because they really don't want to see their embryos destroyed, right? They work too hard for them. They have children that are siblings. It makes it very difficult for them to think about destroying the embryos. So we align on disposition before the legal agreement is signed, ideally before the match. We do talk about disposition before the match because most of our donors would like either the recipient to redonate, or donors often want the embryos back when that family is complete so that they can redonate. It doesn't mean to shortchange the intended parent. They should complete their family with whatever embryos they want to use. But when they're done, the donor wants to then be responsible for the redonation of the embryos.
Right.
There is, of course, there are donors who say, I really want this to be one family or two families. I don't want it going beyond that.
Right. That's the other thing too, is, how far they want to redonate out.
Right.
But at least it gives them the control of to make that decision, how they want to, the donors want to proceed once the intended parent or intended parents are complete with their family.
Right. So if those who are matching outside of an agency should really be including that in a conversation up front, what's happening to those remaining embryos?
Yeah, and these are all things that in the legal agreement we address as well, because it's important that, without mentioning it, you could redonate them to a third party. They could be destroyed. They could be donated to science, and not all donors and parties are okay with that. So it's important that this be discussed and then later included in the legal agreement.
Yeah, and I guess I would throw in one more thing, which is because our donors come to us wanting the embryos to be redonated, they also need to understand that sometimes there are not viable embryos remaining. That
Mhm.
maybe there's one poor quality embryo or two or even three poor quality embryos that can't be redonated. And so they need to be considering that some of those embryos might be destroyed or donated to science. There needs to be an out clause to
Right.
say, sometimes we might not be able to redonate these embryos.
And these embryos can be frozen for such a long period of time. It'd be awful, but there's the potential the donors aren't around to receive them. So, like you said, you always have to think
Right,
of like all the different scenarios of what could be in the future.
right.
I would
Yes.
imagine that the Alabama case would make embryo connections more busy if that became the trend, where people have
Yes,
to use their embryos, no destruction permitted.
right. Yes, I'd have to say Alabama has raised a lot of questions for people. Some to say, yes, we have to donate right away, or I don't want to create embryos because I fear that I won't control the disposition of my remaining embryos. And
Sure.
some who simply say, I have to destroy them now before there's a law that makes me not able to to
There's a
control
lot
that.
of the outfall from that case and the ripple effect is really, I'm sure, really, came across embryo connections into your clients.
Definitely.
So we talked about, the intake, a lot of the discussion points that you have between the embryo donors and the intended parents. What other services does Embryo Connection offer after the matching process is complete?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So we facilitate from start to finish. So we consider ourselves a concierge where we are going to start with a conversation right at the beginning to outline what the process is and what all their options are so that they can
Okay.
really be thinking about that. We when we ask our intended parents and donors to complete profiles, it allows them to think about what some of those choices are that they're making. We then also facilitate the embryo donation psychoeducational session with a mental health professional. We do that on both the donor and the recipient side. So we refer the counselors to them. We send counseling intakes to those counselors so that they can, and to the parties, so that they
Okay.
can have really thoughtful conversations as they're thinking through this process of embryo donation and receipt. And then we match them. We have a full clinical team with
Oh,
fertility nurses that do the records review and FDA screening to qualify those donors as human tissue donors. We gather genetic screening if that's available. We put all that together in an embryo suitability and eligibility report, which is a really nice, concise packet for a clinic to approve the embryos. And so after that match happens, we go to the receiving clinic to get their approval of the embryos. This is a pretty different process than any other embryo donation program that I'm aware of, in that we're really putting everything together so that a clinic is also empowered to make decisions about whether or not they want to accept those embryos. So we give it to the physician, the embryologist, and the donor nurse, so that they can all say, yes, we approve of this donation before the donation is finalized, right? That gives a chance for the intended parent to listen to the advice of their physician and decline the donation or proceed forward. We'll also help them find a new clinic. If, for example, their clinic says these embryos are great, but we don't know the thaw protocol, we'll help them find
yeah.
another clinic.
I'm
Um,
sure that's a dance you have to take because I know every
yes,
clinic's so different with how they accept embryos and FDA
yes,
eligibility, thought processes.
yes, it is. It's pretty complicated. And that's one of the reasons that clinics have always shied away from embryo donation. But because we give them the choice, we find that clinics who previously were not comfortable with embryo donation are comfortable receiving from us because we do give them that
That's
ability
good.
to
You're
choose.
educating not
Um,
just the parties, but the clinics to help this process become more smooth.
Yes,
That's
yes.
awesome.
And then, of course, as you know, Marla, we facilitate the legal agreement. So we get pre-alignment from the donors and intended parents about what goes into that legal agreement. So the foundation is set for attorneys, and then we refer to to independent attorneys for both the donor and intended parents. So they have separate counsel, and the donor attorney drafts and the intended parent attorney reviews to make sure that both parties feel really good about what's going into that legal agreement before they sign it.
Perfect.
and then we coordinate shipping.
And then once legal signed, the legal clearance is issued, is any follow-up that's kind of provided at that point, or the parties just kind
Yeah.
of proceed with their use of the embryos?
Right, absolutely. We coordinate the shipping because that can also be a little bit daunting to get two clinics to coordinate. So we coordinate that shipping and then introduce the parties if they don't know each other already, which mostly they don't, and and give them good luck on their journey. If they do need to redonate their embryos or they need additional embryos, we always welcome our clients back so that we can help them with that. Or if they come back with questions that they need support on, if there is a medical issue, that we can reach out to other parties in that donation.
The communication facilitation that we were talking about earlier too.
Yes.
I mean, it's really an invaluable service that you're offering to help people build their family. Even more special that it's based upon something that you personally went through. You know, I worked with a surrogate, so that really means a lot. It's like taking something that was hard and helping others with it. So, you know, I love working with Embryo Connections, and it's just a great experience when I work with you guys. It's so organized and so everyone's so happy to like go through this and collaborate. And just wanted to share with our listeners, what is the best way to reach out to you and to Embryo Connections to get more information?
Great question. So we have a website. I also actually want to mention a second website. So there's embryoconnections.org. You can explore the website there to learn about what we do. And there are several places right on the front page, as well as in how it works, recipients and donors, to schedule a meeting. That initial intro consult is the best way to learn about our program. You'll meet one-on-one with a client care manager to answer all your questions, learn about the process, what your options are, so that you can feel comfortable moving forward. That's really the best step, is to either fill out that info form and then we send you a link for the meeting, or just schedule the meeting so that you can get right on meeting with us. We also have another website that I really encourage exploring called embracedonation.org. That's an educational platform where we have physicians, attorneys, counselors, donors, intended parents, donor conceived people talk about their journeys and how it was in reality for them, because most people don't know somebody who received or donated embryos. So,
that's awesome. We'll be happy to share that on the podcast for our listeners as well.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to conclude with for today?
No, just a thank you, Marla, just not just for this webinar, but also because it's really wonderful to work with you. You're a great attorney. So
thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I really enjoy working with you and helping all your clients. Thank you so much for joining today and sharing your knowledge and your business with Embryo Connections. And we look forward to working together in the future and sharing more information about Embryo Connections with our listeners today.
Thank you so much, Marla.
Thank you.